Greetings, everyone. Welcome to our exclusive Global Leading Voices webinar campaign. We are delighted to have you join us here today. Please be informed that if you have any questions during the presentation, you may type them into the question box in your control panel. The presenter will answer your questions at the end of the presentation accordingly. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to our presenter, who will begin shortly.
All right, I just wanted to welcome everyone today to today's webinar on information security versus data governance versus data protection. What is the real difference? It is a real pleasure to be here and speaking with all of you today. Let me start with some introductions. My name is Hardeep Malhotra. I am the director at Concert Properties, and this presentation is in collaboration with Moji, a data privacy professional. Moji and me recently met. However, she's a very seasoned professional in the realm of data privacy. Moji, do you want to say a couple of quick words?
Sure. Thank you, Hardeep. Yeah, so I go by Moji and I also go by Abby. I show you they're both my names. I have been in the business process improvement sector for over 15 years and been very passionate, as Hardeep has mentioned, about data privacy. And I am hoping to share with you interesting fun facts about today's topic. And I'd like to thank you all for your attendance today, and also thank PECB for creating this platform for us to meet with. Over to you, Hardeep.
Thanks, Moji. Welcome again to today's webinar. We will go through the webinar and in the end have a Q&A section. So please, if you have any questions, Albana from PECB will be collecting them as we go, and we'll have an opportunity to answer them at the end. So before we get started, again, as Moji said, I really wanted to thank PECB for organizing this webinar and an opportunity to speak with each one of you in the community today. Okay, today what we'll be discussing the importance of information security, some high-profile breaches and the compliance requirements. We will discuss how we take information security beyond compliance and focus on data governance. Next, we'll have Moji who will discuss the importance of privacy, the evolving requirements around privacy, and discuss the relationship between data governance and privacy. We have an exciting agenda, and let's get started. As technology evolves, we have seen the increase in information security incidents over the years. However, there has been a significant shift over the last couple of years with the pandemic. The pandemic has had some impact on the overall increase of information security incidents. Pre-COVID, we did see a steady rise in various security incidents. However, as the pandemic grew and we all moved to remote workforce, so did all the malicious actors and cyber criminals. Traditional crimes that we had in various countries, as we see the stats have actually dropped with all the stay-at-home restrictions. This caused a lot of the criminals moving to cyberspace and committing cybercrime. We have also seen technological advancements in the various types of cybercrime. Some of the key types of cybercrime here we see on the left, where we see a significant rise, is hacking as a service. So traditionally, we used to just see, a group of individuals trying to hack into different organizations. Now we're seeing these offered as a service so that anybody can log in, gain access to the service, and become a hacker. We've also seen ransomware as a service, which is a subscription-based model used to deploy ransomware. So again, a full platform of ransomware that is available, provided by the cyber criminal with Bitcoin wallets and commission structures in place where once the ransomware is fully deployed, they get a certain cut out of the ransomware. Now it's just a matter of a number of clicks and you get the ransomware deployed to an organization. We've also seen a significant rise in a denial of service as a service, which is also interesting. So we see a combination of the hacking as a service, ransomware as a service, and denial of a service using combination by a lot of very non-technological cybercrime threat actors. This is making it a lot easier for someone with very limited technical skills and resources to get up and running fairly quickly and committing cybercrime. An individual doesn't need, a whole army of bots anymore. They can just use any of these services to get up and running fairly quickly. Almost every day, we hear about a new company or a large organization get hit by ransomware. If you look at the news, there's every day we see typically a large organization or even a medium-sized organization. However, we're starting to see an interesting trend now with that. We're starting to see that even smaller organizations or smaller businesses are being hit. No one is left alone. A second trend we see is with the supply chain attacks. We're starting to see third-party vendors or SaaS vendors being targeted. The SolarWinds incident was a prime example where it just impacting one supply chain or third-party vendor impact hundreds of various organizations. So we're starting to see that threat actors, even though your organization may be secure, they're going after the weakest link. With the increased dependency on IoT, we're noticing an increase in IoT devices being targeted, and cybercriminals are using technologies such as AI or automation to really weaponize and laterally move through systems. We're starting to see, software that is available on the dark web, such as PassGen, uses neural networks to learn about, statistical distribution of passwords from data leaks, right? And then generate high quality guesses. This is very advanced AI type of technology that is now being used to commit various kinds of cybercrime or gain access to networks. The common thought is that with the increase in cyber attacks, let's put in additional compliance requirements. And we're starting to see that governments around the world are making cybersecurity requirements mandatory. We saw this after the Colonial Pipeline incident, where the US government has taken steps to provide cybersecurity requirements. In Europe, we're starting to see more stringent GDPR requirements and fines for non-compliance. And there are various other frameworks you can see on the slide here, such as PCI, NIST, CIS, ISO, that all help with compliance. However, is compliance really the answer? You may all ask that because there's so many different compliance frameworks. So in reviewing some of the high profile incidents recently, we see that companies, some of the high profile incidents here, such as Kaseya, SolarWinds, and even the large Sony breach that occurred many years ago, they all had various levels of compliance. So, in the Kaseya incident, they were hit by ransomware, which also then paralyzed 1,500 other organizations. They were SOC level 2, HIPAA, GDPR, ISO 27000 compliant. So if you look at SolarWinds, right, each one of these companies had a various level of compliance. So the key fact is that compliance does help. It does help drive due diligence and drive security within an organization, but it's only the basic building blocks. Organizations that may be compliant may avoid penalties, they might avoid lawsuits, but may not always be secure. And we see that with the high profile incidents that I just talked about. Companies need to take it one step ahead of compliance to reduce the reputation impact that's caused by some of these cyber incidents. One of the other things that we also see is you may have all the compliance frameworks, but compliance frameworks will never be up to speed. For example, of IoT, there's new IoT devices coming out daily, and the compliance frameworks are only the basics. They only give you the basic due diligence that's required. They're never going to teach you or give you all the specific security requirements to secure every single type of IoT device. So how do we embark on making our organization secure? My suggestion, start with the basics, basic cyber hygiene. In organizations that I have worked with prior, we selected a framework. I would say any of the frameworks. There's lots of frameworks out there. One of the frameworks we selected was CIS, right? The Center of Internet Security. So, select a framework such as CIS, and what we did is we focused on the top 5 critical controls. This can be applied with any framework. So you can take any of the frameworks and look at the top 5 critical controls that are identified with CIS. There was a recent study that was conducted and that stated that if you prioritize and do the basic cybersecurity controls well, you will mitigate 83% of all the attacks. 83%, that's a large percentage. So I would suggest is start with those basics and do them well, because if you're mitigating 83% of the attacks, that's the set of controls that I would recommend you focus on. As you're working through your cybersecurity journey, here's some key steps that we took or I took while going through a compliance journey. So the first thing we started off with is conducted a gap assessment, right? Identified the business goals and objectives and then conducted the gap assessment to ensure that your cybersecurity program aligns with the business goals and objectives. Once you've conducted your gap assessment, then you try to get senior leadership buy-in. This is where your compliance frameworks really, really help. So if you've got, if your organization has a specific compliance requirement, this is where getting senior leadership buy-in, this particular step, once you've completed a gap assessment, really, really helps. But it's not all about compliance, because then what I would suggest is focus on the basics and do your basics really, really well. Like, have that strong foundation. And then I would say is don't just run into your journey of compliance, focus and strengthen your incident response, because it's going to take you a lot of time to get to that full compliance roadmap that you built, or addressing all the various controls that a specific compliance framework requires, such as PCI. So focus on your basics and strengthen your incident response. One of the aspects to remember that the journey of getting to a secure organization takes time, and it is ongoing. The one key aspect to remember that it's not a matter, as I said, not a matter of if, it's but when an incident will occur. Hence, when I said strengthen the incident response is probably one of the most key aspects after focusing on the basics. Having an understanding of how your cyber criminals gain access to systems, build appropriate detections related to that, and having and practicing an incident response plan is vital. Here you see, one of the frameworks that I've used in the past is the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. This framework allowed us to understand, okay, how do attackers, conduct reconnaissance, get into environments, how do they install malware, and how do they, what are their actions on objectives? So as in, deploying ransomware or stealing data. Going through an exercise, an incident response exercise, and walking your team to this, and then understanding what the different steps are, that an attacker would take, and what are the response measures you would do, or mitigation measures you would take in the event of an incident is absolutely, absolutely essential. So having an understanding, as I said, of how cyber criminals gain and practicing that incident response is, again, I would say, is very vital. This will also help you get senior leadership buy-in, because when you conduct these tabletop exercises or technical exercises, I would suggest conduct a separate one for a technical team and a second one for the senior leadership. Will help you get a lot of buy-in from senior leadership too, because they will now be put in the hot seat and they will understand, what the impact or would be if a cyber incident were occur. Do this periodically, and you will definitely get buy-in from senior leadership. So as you navigate through your security journey, you're focused on your basics, you focused on your incident response. Now you're starting to get into your compliance journey. And as you work through this compliance and maturity journey, one of the key aspects to remember is today most organizations are data-driven organizations. Data is one of the most important aspects, and you need to have appropriate data governance around this. This will not only help make your organization more secure, but help reduce cost and align with a lot of the regulatory and compliance frameworks we have today, as I mentioned earlier. By 2021, it's one of the stats here in the corner we see, by 2021, insight-driven businesses are to take 1.8 trillion annually from their less informed industry competitors. Organizations are starting to realize this. I work, my organization, we're in the construction property management. Data is such an important element, and it's one of the most important assets in the organization. However, when we see an event of a ransomware or security incident, 9 out of 10 times, cyber criminals want to steal your data because they know that that is the most important element that an organization has, and that's how they hold you ransom. Hence, having an effective data governance program is such a key element, fundamental element of information security. Okay, now I'll pass it on to Moji, who will discuss this from a privacy perspective. Over to you, Moji.
Thank you, Hardeep. That was very insightful. And as Hardeep has mentioned earlier on, we'll be looking at data privacy and its relevance, and also the relationship between data privacy, data governance, and information security. So, I'm sure we're all aware when oil used to be a valuable resource, and we had companies exploiting, discovering, and searching for oil. Well, newsflash, it's now data. Data is now the most valuable resource that companies are searching for, and that's what's led to this new strategy that cyber criminals are creating and deploying every time. They keep on getting advanced because the hunt is on for the data. Having identified that this is a valuable resource, we start to ask ourselves questions like, what are we doing to protect our most precious resource? Who has access to it? Do you know where it is? Where is your data? Do you know its value? What do you actually know about this precious asset? Those are the questions that we ask ourselves. And basically, the next couple of slides that I'll be sharing with you, it's going to be taking a look at how we are looking at this data, this precious resource. What are we doing? What can we do to help to ensure that we protect it and we also utilize it? We can liken it to imagine that you have a story building, like an apartment complex. There are different things that you can do to change the modifications of the structure. And your mind will be at rest knowing that all the changes will hold as long as we have a strong foundation. That's how I'd like us to look at liken the different changes in the privacy requirements we have in different sectors today. We have the GDPR, we have the CCPA, we have HIPAA, we have a whole lot of compliance requirements that companies and organizations have to comply with or abide with. When we look at that, we start to realize that what really matters, or what solves most of the problem, is when we have a solid foundation. So I'll be sharing with you in the next couple of slides the principles that we need to adopt to ensure that we have a strong foundation. So regardless of the compliance requirements that your organization may have, once you apply these following principles or guidelines, you would most of the time be acting beyond compliance and actually getting rewards from your principles or from your framework that you've developed for your organization. Next slide, please. One of the guiding principles that we'll be looking at today is the GDPR's data processing principles. When we say data processing, we mean anything you do with data after when it's been collected, how it's been shared, how it's being accessed, who has visibility to your data, and what you do with the data. The GDPR outlines 7 principles for processing data, the first being lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. When we are collecting this data from our different data subjects, we need to be transparent with them and let them know the reason why we're collecting the data, what purpose it will serve, and why we're collecting it. I don't know if you have been able to experience this, but I have. Whenever I go onto any website today and I click to access any information, the first thing that pops up is, oh, can we have your name, your email address, your telephone number? Everyone's asking for my name, email address, and I feel like a superstar. But really, we need to take a deeper look into that. How are we sharing this information? What reason, what purpose is it going to be serving? Is the organization being honest about what it's being used for? Are they being transparent? These are the questions that we need to ask, and these are the things that we need to, one of the principles that organizations need to abide with to make sure that the customer is able to build trust in them and give them information that they'd require. Another is purpose limitation. Whenever organizations are collecting data, this data has to be serving the purpose that they're indicating it's been collected for. A critical one that I am very particular about is data minimization. We talk about protecting data. We talk about people, unrightful people having access to data. If we collect the data strictly for the purpose it's being collected for, meaning if I were to ask for your name and email because I want to be able to contact you for any promotions that we may be having, is there any reason why I should ask you for your telephone number? I guess not, because the email serves the purpose for communicating with you. So if we can, as organizations, can restrict the amount of data we're collecting for data subjects, that would also limit our exposure to data breaches. And if we're exposed, the limit of the exposure. Another is accuracy. Data is very valuable. It helps to ensure that we're able to make information. It helps companies with predictions, analytics, and all. But if it's inaccurate, it throws the whole purpose off. Storage limitation is we shouldn't have the data for longer than it's required for. So companies have to ensure that if we need a certain information, it's being collected for this purpose and it will last for this length of time within our archives. All this, the 7 principles help to ensure that the amount of data we're collecting is limited, it serves its purpose, and the customer sensing this is able to develop more trust in the company, and this will help us to have better security around our data and also help us with making better decision making. Next slide, please, Edit. Looking at data governance looks at, and loosely defined, as we know, data governance is all about the data throughout the whole life cycle of the data. In data privacy, we have something called the having a record of processing activities. Basically, this is, you can liken it to an inventory that gives you good detailed information on what data you have, where your data is located, how it's used, and who's using the data, or data as you may call it. Having this inventory goes beyond just knowing this, because in the process of creating that inventory, you're able to categorize the data that you have. You're able to apply adequate controls based on the sensitivity of the data that you have. You're able to design products and processes that help you to allocate the right security levels. So you can see the relationship here with data privacy, data governance, and information security. First, you have to identify the data. You have to categorize it. You have to know who's having access to it. You have to know where it's located. Who are you sharing it with? What controls do these other parties have for the data that you're providing to them? These are the questions that we need to ask ourselves and we need to consider with building the firm foundation that can help to sustain the different compliance requirements, the different regulations that you need to keep with, and also to help you to go beyond compliance and actually gain more customer trust, customer understanding, and also enough data to be able to use to excel in any industry that we're looking at. Data governance helps you to ensure that data is usable. It helps you ensure that it's accessible. It also it helps to ensure that it's protected. But that is if you know where the data is. What data do you have? When you're able to comply and have these activities embedded at different levels of developing new products or processes, we're able to ensure that the data that you're able to attest to that you have in your inventory is well secured, is available, accurate, and above all, consistent. Next slide, please, Hadi. Thank you. So we'll look at the high impact data breaches that we've had recently. There have been quite a number of them, but here we have LinkedIn, Facebook, and the Kaseya data that we all heard about. And if you look at the three of them, there's one thing they're looking for: the data. The LinkedIn data breach that we have here, the hacker script the data by exploiting the API. That's how much we know. And API has to do with loosely defined is when different systems or applications are interacting with each other. That's some data moving from one application to another or being transferred. Going back to one of the principles, foundation principles that we mentioned earlier on, we need to know where this data is going. We need to categorize the data. We need to be able to allot it the right security control that it needs to have. Looking at Facebook, it was the data set that was being exposed. Kaseya, it was a supply chain ransomware. It's getting the different ways that data can be accessed, the different ways that these hackers or cyber criminals, as you may call them, can different ways they can deploy to manipulate the system to get what they want from it. The protection of this data is something that we need to keep up with. It's not a one step or one shot do it all. It's a continuous effort. Unfortunately, we won't be able to speak more into this because there will be definitely more than we have access to, more information about this breaches than we have access to. But one thing that speaks to us with this breaches is the data is being sought after legally and illegally. Next slide, please, Hardy. Now we have this big fines. With each data breach, with each major data breach, we have huge fines. We have this, Amazon's paying $886 million, Google in the millions of euros. Imagine if this amount of fines that they had to pay was deployed into having maybe a tighter security or more up-to-date patches, as it may be. But this is a fine that could have been easily avoided. But the more we have these experiences, the better we get at protecting our most valued resource, which is data. Next slide. Now, we have the impact on customer trust. Fine, there can be data breaches. Companies can be asked to pay fines, but there's somebody watching, the customer from which all this valuable and important information about them is being collected. and now being exploited. The customer is watching, and the customer is getting very privacy aware, security aware, and data aware. From the data that was impacted, for most data breaches, for most major data breaches, the customer personal identifiable information, 80% of them are affected by these data breaches. And what do we mean by customer personal identifiable information? This is very important information that can be used to discriminate against people. For example, people's sexual preferences or biometric data. This is information that are very sensitive and need to be given the adequate level of protection. So if I'm as a customer, I see that a company that I trust so much is having my information accessed by unlawful people that I haven't given authority or access to, this discusses a distrust or mistrust, as you may call it, from the customer's perspective to the organization. And customer trust is something that companies work very hard to build on. They spend a lot of resource, they spend a lot of time to be able to get this information. So to have this information taken away from them unlawfully, it's a breach. It's like a violation, and it's something that companies and organizations need to pay additional additional concentration to, because once the trust has been broken, it affects the brand value and a whole lot of other things. Next slide. The whole lot of other things leading to financial loss. When customers see that there's going to be another data breach, and the company's having to pay a ransom, or they're having to spend so much time to fix this this problem that they're having, we see it affect the share price. We see it affect the reputation of the organization. Sometimes it leads to downtime where the company has to take a break, a breather, and then fix things until, for example, with the Kaseya ransomware attack, they had to ask all customers, the company had to ask all customers to shut down all their systems while they fix it for a certain period of time. That's some downtime. Downtime is equivalent to loss of revenue. And the last one is the reputational damage. It takes some time to bounce back from this. Only learning that this can be avoidable and the impact can be reduced helps us to see how data, its protection, its governance, and its privacy is really critical. We have the legal action as well, class actions, we have class actions, we have different types. It could be in any form. The legal action, there's an unending impact of these data breaches. And of course, we have the loss of sensitive data, where people's information is just floating about in the dark web, where anyone can buy it and have access to that information you cherish so much. IBM Security gave their research, and as 2021, as at July 2021, the average total cost of a data breach for major organizations is $4.24 million, and it's growing. It's not a fixed cost, it's a growing cost. And this commands anyone's attention. It commands every organization's attention. It's not actually data privacy or data governance. It's not actually a task for one person. Everybody owns this responsibility when it comes to data privacy and data protection. We all have that task. It starts from the simple practices. What information are you collecting? Are you following the principles for collecting this information, processing this information? Are you keeping a record in your role as it may require for you to know where this data you're collecting is going? Why are you collecting it? Who are you sharing it with? These are critical information that we need to ask ourselves, and we need to make sure that we embed in all processes. Next step. Next slide, beg your pardon. So in a fiscal analysis, as last year, it was with research done, it was identified that with every dollar spent on a mature privacy program, the return on investment was $2.70. That's a pretty good it's a pretty good return on investment, I would say. Taking the time out to build a solid foundation, taking the time out to ensure that private data privacy is embedded in every process and product developed, and it helps to ensure that customers have trust in us, that they're able to ensure that they're protecting themselves against future data breaches. Most people would argue that a data breach is inevitable. It's going to happen. What we're looking at now is what do we do to make sure that when they happen, the impact is not so high and the information that is being lost is very limited. There's several steps that we need to take for that. And as I shared earlier on, the principle is the first thing we look at is the foundation. How do you process your data? Are you following those guidelines? Do you know where your data is? Developing a mature privacy program would always have to involve having a robust data governance framework. In order to ensure that your data privacy principles and your guidelines and your data governance framework are in accordance with the company's goal, ensuring that they align with the company's goals, helps to get buy-in, management buy-in. If they're in alignment and the company organization can see that, okay, if you're able to go along this path and about with these principles or guidelines, this would help us to gain above all our customer trust. It will help us to ensure that we're compliant. It helps us to make sure that we're able to not have data that can be illegally exploited. That will get you management buy-in as long as it's in alignment with the company's goals. Going back to what we had started with, what is the value of your data? Do you know who has access to your data? How well are you protecting it? What are you doing to protect it? Who is protecting your data? How do you know these things? You need to know if you're able, you would know if you're able to have an inventory of your data. What types of data do you have? What types of security controls are you giving it? Where is your data? Identifying the location of your data could sound like a very basic task, but it's actually in-depth because you'd have to go into the different branches of the organization, different sectors, and identify what information is residing in each unit, for example. And we have a multiple storage units for this data. Can we just have one and consolidate them? Reducing the amount of exposure that we could have to any external party that's not allowed to have access to it. Next slide, please. In summary, we need to know your data, protect your data, apply the data processing principles, which are, I'll mention again, being accountable, accuracy, making sure that you don't have more than enough, you're not collecting more than enough data that you need for the purpose you're collecting it for, purpose limitation. lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, and others as we've discussed? Are you investing in a mature privacy program? How mature is your privacy program? A robustly developed information security program, as Pradeep had mentioned earlier on. These are factors that need to be considered in building a solid foundation where, regardless of the regulatory compliance that you need to abide with, regardless of the purpose of the modifications you need to make to your organization, once you're able to have this as the foundation of your company or organization, it's able to withstand the changing requirements. It's able to withstand any data breach, and it's able to help to gain your customer trust and confidence in placing their data in your hands. That about sums it up, I believe. Thank you.
Thank you, Hardeep and Moji for delivering this very informative and detailed webinar. PCB offers training and certification courses which will show your dedication in implementing and managing privacy-related frameworks, and most importantly, you will get recognized worldwide. Now, before moving on with the Q&A session, I am very glad to inform you that the newest PCB training course, Ethical Hacking, is coming soon. This course will help you in safeguarding the networks and systems of businesses and governmental agencies, amongst others. For more information regarding the Ethical Hacking training course, please check the link on the chat box. Now we'll go ahead and take some time to answer some of the questions from the attendees. The first question is, how do I know which compliance program is good for which kind of organization so that I can give better solution to my clients?
I can take that one. That's a really great question, and thank you for that. There's one thing I've seen in the information security space is there's a large number of different compliance frameworks. Now, there are some compliance frameworks that are specifically catered to the industry, such as, you look at PCI, which is, anything you're doing with financial, or if you're using, if you're in the electrical or, industry, then there's NERC, right, or power. Or if you're in the federal government, they have some specific requirements around frameworks. So I would suggest is obviously research the industry they're in and look at if there's any specific compliance requirements or compliance frameworks around there. In the event you don't have any specific compliance requirements, I would say majority of the frameworks, any of the top frameworks that you pick, which is whether it's ISO 27000, CIS or NIST, a cybersecurity framework, any one of those are a great foundation, a great start. I think I mentioned earlier, it's not, in the end of the day, most of those frameworks pretty much relate back to the same control objectives. They might be slightly different, but they're very, very similar. It's not about getting compliance, and I think that's the conversation that I would recommend that you have with companies. It's not just about having compliance with a framework. It's about picking any of the compliance frameworks and saying, okay, which are the most critical top 5? I think I'd mentioned critical CIS top 5. These are the critical, controls. Focus on getting those basics done really well, and then focus on, okay, which type of compliance framework that my organization would best align with. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Hardeep. Next question is, how do I, as a customer, know that my information is safe, secure? Is there anything specifically to look out for?
I'm going to pass that on to Moji. I do have some items that I can discuss, but I think Moji, this falls in your area.
Sure, with all pleasure. So the question, I believe, is how do I know that my information is well protected? Is that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, the question is, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So, sorry, thank you. So first of all, as a data subject, as the owner of your data, before you share any information with anyone, you have a right to ask, how is my information being processed? What do you need the information for? And you can ask also, how is my information being protected? Bear in mind that data privacy, it's a fundamental human right. So you're not being extra by asking that question. So when you ask that question, what should happen is the organization, company, or whoever is asking for that information should feel confident enough to walk you through which measures they're taking to ensure that your data is safe. First of all, your concern, I guess, would be who's having access to this data. How are you securing it? How long will you keep this data for? Are you going to use my information for something more than you're collecting it for? Those are the questions that you can ask, and I do encourage you to feel confident to ask these questions. It is your right.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would say is a lot of organizations are publishing, like, they would have a privacy on their website, would have a privacy and a data privacy and data security section. And a lot of the big organizations are starting to do this, which kind of walk you through all the different security controls that that they have in place to protect your data. And then I've seen some organizations now, a new trend where they're starting to publish data transparency reports, which also talk about, what are the controls, what are the frameworks they abide by, what type of incidents have occurred, where they've shared information with others. So there's a lot of information that companies, especially large organizations, are starting to do to lay that level of confidence and trust in their customers, to give them the confidence in terms of how their data is captured and data is shared. Some companies are, I wouldn't say this is across the board, some companies are way better than others and leaders in the space, but as Moji, you mentioned, yes, it's the fundamental right, and you have the right to ask that question.
Thank you, Mojisola and Hardeep. The next question is, how do I better protect data for clients in a country where there is no law like GDPR?
Yeah, Moji, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I'll take that one. So there are different types of ways that other countries that are outside the GDPR can comply. We have something called adequacy decision, where the country that you're in should be able to identify if the measures that the third party is having to ensure that they are within compliance. So within their sector, in their location, what are the compliance measures that they're taking? If it's outside of the GDPR, then the country or the company would definitely have their own requirements, and then you could check to see if it's within the if it complies with the necessary requirements that the GDPR stipulates for other countries to have. If it doesn't, then the red flag can be raised as to asking them to provide their current measures that they're taking towards protecting their data. It depends on if you're looking at it from the data subject's view, then the data subject, you the owner of the data, would ask that, you can ask the question, you can approach the company or the organization for their compliance measures and what steps they're taking. And if it's an organization that's looking at it from an organization's perspective, then the organization would have to ensure that they provide how they're meeting the requirements from the GDPR perspective. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mojisola.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I just wanted to add to that, and I think there was a good point I saw you had brought up. So in the absence of compliance, right, like compliance requirements like GDPR, there was a stat that you had provided, which was I felt resonated really well with me. This was for every dollar you spent on a privacy program, companies receive $2.70. So I would say, in the absence of a country or something, or a company that's looking at privacy and they don't have any specific requirements, making the business case for that is very, should be straightforward by, using that stat and saying that you invest in a privacy program. You may not have the specific GDPR requirements, but you could use that as a framework, right? And build a privacy program to get that return of investment. So I just wanted to add to that and to say is, don't just look at, my country or, my, company doesn't need to align with GDPR. What's the discussion with senior leadership to be is, here's the return of investment, here's the value, here's the reputation risk that you're addressing, and from a return investment, here's the money value that you're getting back. And maybe we can use GDPR as a framework, and try to build a privacy program with those principles in place.
Thank you. The next question is, with numerous data breaches, what is your recommendation regarding sharing private information on social media platforms such as LinkedIn or Facebook?
So I can answer that, and Moji, I'll pass it over to you. So what I would suggest is, again, I wouldn't suggest that don't share any data, because a lot of the social media platforms, they're there to help you interact with your friends, your family, your coworkers. So my suggestion is that understand the type of data that you are sharing, and understand the implications of what would happen as a result of, if that data would be leaked or breached or, shared with others, right? So, that would be my recommendation in terms of, a lot of people say, well, I'm not using social media, or I don't use social media at all. And I would say, obviously that's a personal choice. However, I would say, if you are using social media, just understand the risk. It's always a risk versus reward decision, and try to minimize that amount of information, because the more information you share on these social media sites, we've seen cyber criminals, when they're trying to, their first step, which is reconnaissance, and I think I can allude back to the cyber kill chain, is they will try to scrape, areas such as LinkedIn, trying to understand, who's who in the organization, what do they work, what systems are in place, so make sure that when you share that information, is that you understand the risk and how it could potentially be used. Over to you, Moji.
Thank you, Hardeep. You basically summed it up. And what I had to add to that is, ask yourself before you share any data, why am I sharing this? What is this for? Do I have to share this much? Data sharing is something that helps to give you a better experience. For example, your resume is on LinkedIn and you need it for visibility. That's data you're sharing. So it's not about not sharing data, but it's about asking yourself, is this data that I'm sharing relevant to the purpose I wanted to achieve for me? I think we should just stop and ask ourselves those questions before we share data. It will help to ensure that we're abiding with one of the principles, which is purpose limitation and data minimization, as you may want to apply it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can both data protection and data governance be managed by a data protection officer?
That's a good question. Data governance is a framework on its own. Data protection, it's also a framework on its own. You could have a hybrid because there's similarities in them. Even though there are similarities, data governance is separate from data protection. I always advocate that every organization has a dedicated person or position for the data protection in order to make sure that you're getting the best out of that position, and also to ensure that you're creating a robust privacy program. You need a dedicated person for data protection. If you'd like, you could have a hybrid or hire a consultant to take care of the data governance part of it. But as we've seen, it is essential. So the identification of having two different parties, two different positions for those two different areas will be a business decision. But those two separate areas with a lot of similarities. Hardeep, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, and I would say is in the end of the day, every organization has its budgets, and for larger organizations, I would highly recommend definitely try to segregate the positions because there's a lot of similarities, but there's also potential areas where there could be potential conflict or decisions that may conflict each other, right? However, I would suggest is there's nothing stating that a single individual can't do both. It's just a matter of understanding the business priorities, maybe start small in an organization, see how that works. It's all about laying the foundation and principles in place, and then trying to reevaluate and understand, okay, where can these positions be segregated on their own, so that they have specific responsibilities around data governance, around data privacy, and even information security.
Thank you. The next question is there an effective way to raise awareness for everyone, not just the major players like Google or financial institutions?
So I can take the first part and pass it on to you. Effective way of raising awareness. So I would say is we're starting to see awareness increase already. I think I mentioned earlier, post-COVID, we're starting to see the number of breaches significantly increase. We're starting to see more sophisticated types of attacks. We're starting to see large number of supply chain attacks. I think Moji, you mentioned, the number of types of data breaches and fines by GDPR are significantly increasing. So we're definitely seeing an increase in awareness across organizations, and organizations are doing more than what they can. Can we do more? I'm sure we can. And I think part of that is raising awareness within the community, raising awareness within the common, the common general public. I think these are all avenues of people understanding, why am I asking those types of questions, as Moji said, why am I sharing this data? Who am I sharing it with? How are you protecting it? These are all ways that we can all work together to raise awareness. I don't feel that it's one organization or one entity's responsibility. I feel that it's a collective responsibility that we all need to ask those questions on a periodic basis, and be cautious when we're sharing that information. Over to you, Moji.
Thank you, Hardeep. You basically summed it up. So yes, when we need to make sure that there's a role in every organization for data protection. And it's an organization, like I said earlier on, it's an organization, everyone has a role in an organization to promote data privacy. Everyone has a role in the organization to question what they're doing with the data that they have, who they're sharing it with. And that awareness is something that organizations have to imbibe in their culture. So that way, every level, every unit, everyone has the responsibility. And the data protection officer owns that task to help to drive that purpose, that awareness within the organization, so that everyone is aware that they have a role to play. Thank you.
Thank you. Due to time limitations, this would be the last question. How do you showcase your good work, robust privacy program to win your customers?
How do you showcase what you're doing to your customers? Well, that's the purpose of the privacy notice that Hardeep had mentioned earlier on. As it regards privacy, data privacy, the data privacy notice is the information that the company has for their customers when they access their website. You should notice some websites when you go onto them, there's something that pops up either at the bottom or the top, as it may be, where they let you know what they will be doing with your data. And if you have to get more information about it. It's most of the time, there's an option where you can click on and you can get more information about what they do with your data. And you have the option, you should have the option to opt out of their policy if you don't feel comfortable with how your data will be used. And if you do feel comfortable, you have the option to accept it as well. So that is an opportunity for companies to show customers what they do with their data. It's also an opportunity for companies and organizations to build trust in their customers so they can feel comfortable sharing information on the website. Over to you, Hardeep. I'm not sure if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was gonna say. Is I think companies that are more transparent, publishing these transparency reports, giving you the options to opt in, opt out, telling you how they're protecting your data and and what they do with your data, is a great way for organizations to showcase what they're doing to protect your information. Most customers, once they're informed that their data is being appropriately secured and treated in a good way, they're more willing to actually share more data with organizations. Because I would say is sharing data with an organization is the way to go. No longer we can just say we're not going to share any data, right? A good example is, when you buy something, whether it's on Amazon or anything like that, you get recommendations on products and things, and actually that's quite helpful. Sharing that information with these organizations is actually very helpful from an end customer perspective. And I think I even mentioned earlier, is most organizations are data-driven organizations. That's where the world is heading towards, right? So being transparent and providing the customers with options is a great way of showcasing, your privacy program and your due diligence that you're doing to establish trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Hardeep and Moji for presenting today, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. Please be informed that this session is recorded and will be posted on our website and YouTube channel along with the slides of the presentation. Thank you all, and looking forward to having you on our upcoming webinars.
Thank you.
Thank you.